Okay, Kate, so we'll get started. Thank you everyone for coming along to this webinar today. My name is Rebecca Prince-Ruiz and I'm the Executive Director of the Plastic Free Foundation, and really looking forward to sharing with you what we've been working on to help tackle the problem of single-use coffee cups. I will start by acknowledging that I'm speaking today from Wajak Noongar Budja and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing custodianship of this land. And I'd just like to introduce to you, we've got someone from New York here. Kate Noble from WWF Australia. Kate, if you'd just like to introduce yourself and we'll get going.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. I'm really pleased to be here. Yes, as Rebecca said, I lead our plastic pollution work at WWF Australia, working as part of our global network and our global No Plastic in Nature initiative as well.
Great. So thanks, Kate. So the format of today is I'm going to talk to you a bit about some research that we have done here in Australia on people's behaviours and choices around drinking takeaway coffee from cafes, and some insights that are informing our Choose to Up Cup campaign. And then Kate is going to talk more from a policy perspective around why we're tackling the single-use coffee cup, what's being done on this issue around the world, and how our approach fits into the circular economy. And Kate, perhaps you can also just speak to what we know about the waste issue in terms of numbers of cups here in Australia. And then also to share what we're doing with the Choose to Up Cup initiative, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So why Up Cup? So as I'm sure many of you are aware, with Plastic Free July, we focus on waste avoidance, on helping people and helping organisations choose to refuse single-use plastic for July. And whilst the campaign is in July, we're actually really about long-term behaviour change. And though Plastic Free July started in Australia, it is now a global movement, and last year 140 million people took part from signing up from 190 countries around the world. So this initiative is certainly global. Just asking you, Kate, just checking you can see my screen with the Why Up Cup slide on it?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Great. So one of the reasons that we're choosing to tackle the single-use coffee cup this year is, particularly after COVID, giving people a reset on their behaviours. During the pandemic, obviously some cafes stopped accepting them. People were concerned about the potential human health impacts in terms of catching COVID from the cups. And so we felt this July was a really important to have a single item for people to hook into. And so this challenge will be run the 25th to the 31st of July. And so we've been building up to this throughout the month. It also comes at a time that many jurisdictions are actually looking at that have tackled some of the problematic single-use plastic items in their litter streams. They've looked at plastic bag bans, introducing container deposit schemes for beverage containers, and phasing out other forms of single-use plastics. And we know that on the horizon for a number of jurisdictions, including Western Australia, where we live, that's in our next phase of our single-use plastics ban. And what we're our focus particularly on is making sure, as we start to tackle these single-use plastic items, and the coffee cup in particular, we're not just replacing the millions, in fact billions of these items that are either made from plastic or lined with plastic and the plastic lids, with single-use other items that still use resources and still have an impact on the waste stream. So we're just focused in this Up Cup challenge on the waste avoidance piece. Another one of the reasons is that what we know also from our research is people don't understand that there's even the paper-based cups are lined with plastic, and because that they're largely paper, although that does vary in between jurisdictions, people aren't thinking about the coffee cup in the same way they might be about plastic bags and straws. And it has become such a ubiquitous part of many people's daily lives, and it's a bit unseen. And so whilst it is not necessarily the biggest issue in our litter streams or our waste management streams, they're a very frequently used item that we think is a good first step for many people and many businesses, and we have a lot of interest from the corporate sector. So there's that. There's the fact governments are looking at this, but also last year, this image is from when I did we had a plastic-free morning tea at Government House in Canberra in Australia, and I was talking to some school students who'd been doing Plastic-Free July, and the Governor-General of Australia asked these two girls, what are you going to do for Plastic-Free July? And they said, we've been doing it for a few years. We don't know what else we can do. Like we don't buy a lot of stuff in our homes. They said we have been doing waste-free. We started with doing waste-free Wednesdays, so bringing lunches on Wednesdays with no plastic packaging. Now we do waste-free lunches every day, and we really care about this issue. We know a lot about this issue. We learned about it at school. But we keep seeing our parents and our teachers using these single-use cups, and we want to do something about that. And so I've actually heard that from a number of young people, and that's also been part of our motivation. So the Choose to Up Cup challenge, the idea behind the name Up Cup is that it is something positive. We can all up our cup game, level up, either and we're focusing on the positive behaviours. So either bringing your own reusable cup, borrowing or swapping one from some cafes that have either got an informal cup exchange scheme like a mug library or have a formal scheme, or just simply take 10 minutes to sit down and enjoy your cuppa there. So we've got information of how people and organisations can get involved, some ideas for cafes, some background information which Kate will speak to, as well as some handy posters and resources to share it on social media. So in May, we did a survey, and this is an Australian survey of almost 1,000 adults. And what we found was that definitely we are coffee consumer addicts. So 88% of adults buy coffee from cafes. And we also found that we live our lives on the run, which is, again, I'm sure no surprise to people, with only 16% of these coffee drinkers that are buying coffee from cafes, a bit of a tongue twister there. So only 16% are always choosing to dine in. And we know that 32% either always or usually opt to BYO. Interestingly, and I think this speaks volumes to people's intentions, is 100% of people who purchase coffee, takeaway coffee from a cafe, actually own some form of reusable cup. And people are concerned. So 91% of people surveyed said they worry about using a single-use coffee cup. We also had some really good, and that's why, we're really focusing on the behaviours. So it's not about going and buying a new cup, it's about using what you have, taking part in the cup exchange scheme, or just simply sitting and staying. We also have got some kind of further insight. So we know that across the demographics, that although we have high level of awareness and concern about the plastic pollution issue from younger people, the 18 to 34-year-old age bracket actually have low participation in terms of using reusable cups. So the kinds of coffee drinkers that we're targeting to BYO or use a cup exchange are actually younger people, people in full-time employment, and people working in CBDs. So from our research, we know that older people, interestingly, people who live in regional areas, are already typically using reusable cups. So social media will be a really important part of this initiative. So the idea is simple. It's just to help people, prompt reminders to bring, borrow or stay. And whilst we are very motivated by the problem, like the Plastic Free July Challenge, we really are just focused on sharing solutions and sharing what people are doing, what businesses are doing, and what cafes are doing. And it's obviously a challenging moment for cafes and all small businesses. So we want to really support and help them to make a difference, whether that's an informal mug library, or just helping their customers, or simply just asking them first, not just, which is seems to be becoming the norm, just choosing the giving a takeaway as a default. So we've got posters in that resource kit encouraging people to bring their own cup, handy ways for people to remind them in their own lives, or if we're having an event. I spoke at a morning tea at a conference recently. They had no catering facilities there, so I just we talked to the organisers, and they all decided they were just going to all bring their own cup to this work event. We're linking in the in this resources toolkit to a number of different cup exchange schemes, as well as some ideas to how a cafe, or even a workplace might, for that matter, might set up a mug library. In Fremantle, where our office is, we've got, this article says 12, it's actually now I think 15 cafes have signed up as a precinct, and they're involved in a cup exchange trial that's supported by 2 of our local governments, City of Fremantle and the town of East Fremantle, Fremantle Ports and the DBCA. And so these cafes are using an Our Kinds cup exchange scheme, which is either some stackable cups, or they've also got a great partnership with local op shops, and so they're using reuse cups. So that's another great example, and we've got lots of local organisations and businesses supporting that. And I think the stay choice is also really important. Just the idea that you could take 5 minutes or 10 minutes just to sit down, smell the coffee and enjoy. And it's really interesting what we know from our research of the general public in terms of when we measure behaviours of people participating in Plastic Free July, that they've actually got an increased sense of well-being and are more connected to their local communities. And I actually think just that act of sitting down and or standing up and having a coffee in a cafe like the Italians do are really important behaviours that need to become part of this this picture. So that's the initiative. We'd love you all to get on board. As I said, we've shared links in there to organisations like Upstream Solutions in the US, which has a great global directory of cup exchange schemes, so people can look up this map, and no matter where you are in the world, well, not everywhere in the world, but you can find any cup exchange schemes that are in your country. And I know there's a number of schemes available in Australia that are on there. So we also see this Cup initiative as an opportunity to collaborate. So I know we've got a number of not-for-profits on this call and councils that are doing a lot of great work in their communities tackling the single-use cup. So please share those with us, because over the coming couple of weeks, we'd like to be really promoting the range of ways people are tackling this issue. So I'm just going to hand over to Kate now, so you can talk through the through that coffee cup, through the policy paper. Thanks, Kate. You're just on mute.
If you could just enable screen sharing, that would be great. If you can, otherwise I'll just speak without the slides.
That's all good.
Okay, can you see that one?
Yeah, thanks, Kate.
Great. So thank you, Rebecca. You just flashed up in the last sort of minute or so policy briefing that WWF and the Plastic Free Foundation have worked together on over the past month or so. And what we really aimed to do was pull together a lot of the research that had been done around coffee cup behaviours, but also policy research in terms of policy levers and what works and what hasn't worked elsewhere in the world. And that's the piece that Rebecca brought up recently that will be available if anyone wants to reach out and receive a copy of that directly. We're happy to provide. So I wanted to start quite big and then zoom into coffee cups. And I won't spend much time on these slides, but this is really a snapshot of plastic flows in Australia, 2017, 2018, thanks to CSIRO and thanks to Envisage Works for the data. And it gives an indication of where we're at with a circular economy for plastics in Australia at this point in time, showing that, you know, the significant majority or almost exclusively, we're looking at virgin inputs and imports of plastics with very little recycled. And if we can, okay, sorry. Moving on to the next one, this is a visualization of where we could aim to be by 2030. And you can see that that looks like a significant reduction of inputs and virgin inputs and a significant increase in recycling. So that's just a quick snapshot of circular economy for plastics. Now, admittedly, coffee cups and lids are a very, very small proportion of that. But in our view, really worth focusing on. A lot of these product types and streams will require very different policy interventions to address them. And a lot of them will have different profiles in terms of how much they can be reduced versus how much it makes sense to recycle certain products and or compost certain products. So looking at coffee cups really is a really good opportunity to look at a very specific product where we have a huge amount of consumption and we have some clear pathways or possibilities to look at how we reduce that. It's also seen as a bit of a symbolic product, and I think that's really important. It's symbolic because a lot of people hold it in their hand every single day, and it's also symbolic of a, you know, a hugely kind of wasteful product. There's some really good research that's come out of the UK also looking at sort of certain single-use products as litter beacons. And that research found that where people see litter beacons, and coffee cups one of these, it's the kind of larger, more visible items when they're in the environment, they really attract other litter. So they, in effect, can act as a bit of a nudge, a behavioural nudge for people to think that it's okay to litter. So that's, you know, those are two really good reasons to focus on this specific product. I'm going to talk a little bit about the waste hierarchy and then have a look at the kind of the policy picture across Australia and then internationally. The waste hierarchy, as most of you will know, really fundamentally underpins our approach to waste avoidance, management and regulation in Australia. It is enshrined in almost in state and territory legislation, and it's also enshrined in the Australia's waste management legislation and our plastics plan. So it is there not just for, not just as a nice thing to have, it is enshrined in legislation and the way we approach waste. And of course, reduce, refuse, repair, right up there at the top. And as also many of you will know, too often, our approach is really focused right at the bottom there, the least preferred options in terms of recovering, treat and landfill. So bring, borrow, stay really sits at the top of the waste hierarchy when we're talking about coffee cups. And it is absolutely where we should have a really significant focus, not just in terms of supporting individual behaviour change and action at community level, but in terms of the way we approach this fundamentally from a regulatory perspective. Disposables, regardless of the material type, really sit at the bottom as the least preferred option. A different way of looking at this, and there is some overlap, is to look at circular economy principles, which are less embedded in our approach, our policy approach within Australia, but are becoming increasingly a focus for this kind of work. So this looks at the way that we can significantly reduce our reliance on raw materials and keep materials in the economy and value those materials for as long as possible. You get a slightly different picture when you look at disposables and reusables and return and rent schemes, depending on whether you look at the waste hierarchy and the circular economy, but they're really very complementary. So circular economy starts with the absolute importance of design, noting that a lot of waste is created in that design phase. And if you design products really well, you will massively reduce the amount of waste that you produce. Well-designed reusable coffee cups are absolutely a genuine circular economy solution. Those materials are valued, they stay in the economy for as long as possible, they're very repairable, reusable, and at the end of their life, they're readily recyclable, or the components can be replaced as well. Reuse schemes work really well in some contexts and provide a really good circular solution as well. And disposables, as we saw with the waste hierarchy, really not a great solution in terms of, regardless of whether you're looking at circular economy principles or the waste hierarchy. This is a snapshot of the state of plastics in Australia scorecard that WWF Australia has been producing for the last 4 years. And it looks at some of the most problematic, harmful, unnecessary single-use plastic products that are currently on the market and the progress of states and territories in addressing those, and in many cases phasing them out. So we can see coffee cups and lids there. We've seen a huge amount of progress in relation to a whole lot of these products. This still remains one of the trickier items in terms of working out the best ways to significantly reduce our consumption. And you can see that that's reflected in this snapshot here. And finally, I'm just going to talk really quickly about the emerging evidence base, specifically around reuse rates, disposable coffee cups, and some of the initiatives that are being undertaken in other parts of the world. So in terms of the evidence base, this is an emerging area, but there are quite a few studies, both in Australia and internationally, that have really tried to home in on issues around behaviour change, what works in terms of increasing reuse rates and reducing the use of disposables, and in what context and what some of the real drivers of those behaviours are. It's fairly clear from that evidence base, and it is still quite small and emerging, but it is fairly clear that charging separately for cups does work quite well, and it works better than incentives. So that means separating the cost of the coffee, i.e. the substance within the packaging, and the packaging. So this has been done in a number of countries. It's been done in a number of field experiments around the world, and that research has shown that the charge works a lot better as an incentive to increase reuse rates than a discount. Now, discounts are great. You know, they are a way for cafes to really demonstrate their intent. They're a way for individuals to, to encourage their local cafe to do that. It's not to say that that's not a good thing to do, but certainly if you're looking from a systems perspective, and if you're looking for a way that that governments can play a role in really driving that change at a kind of much higher level, then charges is something to consider. Charges combined with other actions tends to work really well as well. So that's, information around pro-environmental behaviours, the scale of the problem of coffee cup waste, etc. And obviously what Rebecca's research has shown is that there is a huge gap in terms of, the behaviour. So the number of people almost universally owning reusable coffee cups, but that big gap between actual reuse rates and ownership is certainly something to be aware of. I think it really shows that expecting individual behaviour change without kind of supporting that at a systemic level is only going to get us so far. And with nearly 2 billion coffee cups disposable used in Australia every year, you know, that's a pretty significant challenge. In terms of action, I'll just run through this really quickly, but we're seeing in the EU, Ireland, UK, and in the States, really some quite significant approaches to dealing with this issue from a regulatory perspective. So looking at mandating those charges, the separate charges, which doesn't increase the cost to cafes, doesn't increase the cost to consumers, but just really puts a value on that product in line with the circular economy principles and says, well, if you want the packaging, then you pay for the packaging. So that's something that's being explored in the UK, Ireland. EU is requiring member states to set reduction targets and report against these, and looking and has enshrined labelling requirements in their single-use plastic directive. And in California, there's some pretty substantial kind of action on banning single-use plastic cups, requiring all dine-ins to be reusable, and mandating charges as well. So that's just a really quick snapshot. I'll hand back over to you, Rebecca, and look forward to any questions later.
Thanks very much, Kate. Just if people could just pop any questions for the last 5 minutes in the chat. We will be, so those that the research that Kate is referring to is in the WWF, the policy paper, which is we've linked to from the UpCut page. So we'll send everybody a follow-up email with all of that, that information in there afterwards. And we're also recording this webinar as well, which we can also share. Just Kate, just wanting to just a comment about the incentivizing rather or the separate charge. I actually think one of the concerns I have, particularly now with the expectation of a discount for bringing a reusable cup, is a 50-cent discount is not an insignificant ask of a business, because I'm sure that in general, a piece of packaging, the cup and the lid wouldn't cost 50 cents. So I really like the idea of actually, if you want a piece of packaging, that you need to pay for it.